on August 27th, a guy named Jash Dholani from Ahmedabad, India, and whose Twitter tag is Old Books Guy, and whose Twitter motto is sharing new ideas from old books. I think he's got about 50,000 followers. Tweeted this. He said that the most annoying people in the world would like to say that there are no objective differences between good art and bad art. And then he published what he called a master list. Who's the master, I wonder, of 15 differences between good art and bad art. And this caused quite a stir. A lot of people for, a lot of people against. Even a guy like John Williams, who is the head book critic at the Washington Post, chimed in calling it high-level trolling. I disagree that it's trolling. I disagree that he's trying to bait us. I think he believes, Jash Dholani believes what he's saying, although he is out, clearly, to get followers. I've heard him say that on podcasts. How he chose his handle, how he chose his niche. Without a doubt, he considers himself a kind of intellectual guru in training. He prides himself on his interactions with guys like Elon Musk and Jordan Peterson. But anyway, there was a lot of people responding to this. And the detractors, he kind of attacked by calling communists, okay? And also he put up photos, for example, contrasting Marcel Duchamp's fountain, which is an upside-down urinal signed Aramut, with Perseus with the head of Medusa, which was a statue that was unveiled in Florence in the mid-1500s by Benvenuto Cellini, or a photo of Comedian, which is just a banana duct taped to a wall, next to the famous statue, The Veiled Virgin, by Giovanni Strazza. And his point is that modern art seeks to destroy classical ideas of art because it cannot, all in caps, compete with it. And this is the problem in many ways with the list. He's not very precise with words. For example, you could say that modern art challenges classical ideas of beauty, and really in many ways it can't compete with classical ideas of beauty, or can't compete on the same terrain because the terrain has changed. And these modern artists challenge these ideas, pushing the envelope, questioning what art might be. Anyway, I'm going to go through one by one these 15 differences between good art and bad art, the master list. And I feel like it helps us maybe define the gray area in some ways. I realize that's a contradiction in terms, but hey, let's go for it. Okay, number one, good art improves our mood, bad art makes us feel weird. Well, what does improve mean? What does weird mean? And what is the pre-existing state of mind of the person whose mood is being improved, or the person who's made to feel weird? For example, what happens if I read a book or I see a film that confirms, let's say, the very pervasive cliches that exist in our society, like I can be whatever I want to be as long as I put my mind to it, or I don't know true love because I haven't found the right person yet, okay? Let's say I believe those half-truths, those cliches, okay? And the book confirms that, and it confirms those cliches in me. Well, that's going to improve my mood, although perhaps I should be made to feel a bit weird, if weird means to feel a bit out of sorts and perhaps lost, because look, I'm probably a bit lost if I put all my marbles behind those quite dubious ideas. I think good art should make certain people feel weird. Number two, good art boosts our energy, bad art saps it. Well, I'm just going to continue the same line of argument. If a work of art challenges my facile and flimsy worldview, that's probably going to sap my energy, at least for a little while, until I come around and start taking life more seriously, start looking more deeply into it. Hopefully the work of art is encouraging that in me, and then I might begin to make some slow and steady, if not endorphin-producing progress. Three, good art sets off an upward spiral, bad art sets off a downward spiral. More of the same from me. Anyone who has ever gone through a productive life change, maybe getting out of a parasitic relationship, maybe overcoming addiction, maybe quitting a dead-end job and having to face unemployment, maybe starting a new artistic project, maybe moving abroad. At the beginning, they experience big doubts that could send them into a downward spiral until certain steps toward progress start to be made. I simply take issue with the term upward spiral. This is what I mean when I see he's imprecise with words. That's just not how progress takes place. We don't suddenly spring into an upward spiral. We take steps, all right? That's the metaphor that rings true to me. I mean, you can explode or blow up and become famous, but that's not necessarily a step toward progress. Good art, I think, helps us maybe take those steps toward progress simply by allowing us or forcing us to be honest with ourselves. 4, good art clarifies the mind and bad art confuses it. Well, what if our mind is bolstered by a bunch of false premises, prejudices, biases, misconceptions, truisms rather than truths? What if that work of art twists all that garbage and makes it seem like it's true? Jash Dholani seems to be under the impression that the human mind can't be deceived. If our flawed worldview is shattered, that's a good thing, even if for a while our mind is left confused. 5, good art produces momentum and bad art produces stagnation. Well, if we're going in the wrong direction, then we have to fucking stop. And if we stop, it's probably going to take a while for us to get going again, right? Good art should sometimes curb momentum. Sometimes it should stop us short. For number 6, he gives us a drug metaphor. Good art is like bulletproof coffee, and bad art is like weed. Well, this shows a clear drug preference. I, too, prefer coffee to weed. I've got a busy life. I've got a wife, I've got kids, I've got a job. I've got chores to do. I've got a bunch of administrative bullshit, right? Coffee helps me clear the deck, helps me make the most of the day and chug on. While weed makes me feel confused, paranoid, saps my energy, I get less done, but also sometimes it makes me or shows me things about my life that perhaps I don't want to look at. Ways that I might be able to make my life more meaningful while also at the same time perhaps getting less things done. Why can't a work of art be both bulletproof coffee and weed? Perhaps more coffee than weed, but a little bit of weed too. Number 7, he says that good art is structured and rhythmic, and bad art is unstructured and obsessively anti-rhythm. Again, what undermines this list is the imprecision with words and his refusal to acknowledge gray areas. You can't be obsessive about something that doesn't create patterns, right? You can't be obsessively anti-rhythm. You can be obsessively, a book can be obsessively structured, obsessively rhythmic, and a lot of bad art suffers from that and becomes monotonous. Again, and this leads us to gray areas. Very often structure is there to set us up for when structure is dispensed with and we are transported to places where only art can take us. Let's take, for example, Paul Bowles' legitimately classic novel, The Sheltering Sky. It starts out with a specific rhythm and structure, lulls us into believing we think the book is one thing. He smoked some weed, wrote one of the most famous scenes in modern literature, okay? Killed off who we thought was the protagonist, and then the book became something else, took on an entirely different rhythm, and it is a legitimate classic. So, here we have an example of the gray area. Something can be both structured and not structured at the same time. For number 8, Jash Dholani says that instinct knows. That good art is instinctively recognized as such, and that bad art is instinctively recognized as a scam. Instinct, huh? As if instinct can't be corrupted. There are instinctive liars. I have been robbed by instinctive thieves. I think that Jash Dholani is too young and too inexperienced to come up with an insightful list that distinguishes between what's good art and bad art. Something can be both good art and bad art at the same time. I would even say that the best art blurs the line between what good art and bad art is. Read, for example, Guts by Chuck Palahniuk. You can't read that story without feeling like shit afterwards, but if you have the guts to really think about what that story means, what Chuck Palahniuk might be saying with it, well then, you walk away improved, I would say. Number 9, good art is like a good map, and bad art is like a malevolently bad map. First of all, maps are not good or bad. They're either accurate or inaccurate. Perhaps a malevolently bad map is one that pawns itself off as accurate without being so, and therefore intentionally misinforms. But let's just say you show a cylindrical globe to a die-hard flat earther, where they're going to instinctively recognize that as a scam, right? So where are we now? Personally, I don't think art should be like a map or a guide. Perhaps it can clear our head and allow us to dispense with maps. I mean, what the fuck do we need maps for? Why do we have to go anywhere to make progress? That would be an idea worthy of a great work of art. For number 10, he puts in the good art column, sweat, tears, and struggle. And in the bad art column, obfuscation, lies, and resentment. So what's he saying here? Is he saying that good art in some way espouses and champions struggle, sweat, and tears as the way to meaningful advancement and truth, and that obfuscation, lies, and resentment hinder all that? I'd say that Jash Dholani and I agree on something there. For number 11, he says that good art wishes to be canonic and bad art wishes to destroy the canon. I don't think that any artist worth his or her salt sets out to be either canonic or to destroy the canon. They just set out to tell the truth as they see it. And if their vision of the world is penetrative, prescient, profound, then perhaps it catches on, it finds a place in the canon, and perhaps in the process nudges other visions of the world out of it. It's as simple as that, really. For number 12, he says that good art hints at forgotten values and that bad art mocks the concept of values. Can values really be forgotten? Perhaps they can be perverted. Perhaps they can be paraded out as for the good of all when they aren't. I'm thinking of things like belief in our country, belief in our government, belief in law and order, belief in some collective well-being. But what happens if our country, our government, the cops that protect it, and the collective are in the hands of creeps? Hopefully artists are the first ones to point that out to us, but then you can be sure that the powers that be are going to accuse those artists of being against the tried and true, enemies to traditional values. Personally, I don't think that values can get much more specific than things like truth, justice, and honesty. And if they do get more specific than that, then they run the risk of being legitimately mocked. For number 13, he says good art empowers life and bad art enfeebles life. Life? That is just too imprecise to me. The devil is alive. Cancer is alive. Mob mentality is alive. Bullies ganging up to go after the villain of the moment, that's alive. None of those things should be empowered. For number 14, he says that good art believes in and tries to produce beauty, and that bad art spits on beauty and actively celebrates ugliness. I hate to break out a cliche to defend against a cliche, but beauty really is in the eyes of the beholder. If that weren't the case, then only saints and supermodels would find sublime love with another human being. And there is the case of Saint Camillus de Laelis, whose vocation to take care of the sick was so strong that smells of rotting flesh would send him into raptures, and the smells of perfumes would make him want to retch. Personally, I think it's easier to pin down truth than to pin down beauty. In fact, the beautiful is often not true. Perhaps the veiled virgin was as ugly as sin, or perhaps Perseus was pockmarked and hairy, with a big hanging gut and a bulbous nose and a double chin. Who knows? For number 15, he concludes that good art is man's divine right and terrible duty, and that bad art is whining, seething, coping, and a waste of time. Once again, his imprecision with words. Terrible duty. If the creation of good art were a terrible duty, nobody would do it. And divine right? Look, I believe in God as much as anybody, but I'm not going to aggrandize myself or anyone else to the extent that I believe that God has given us the right to make our puny little creations. It's true that bad art is a waste of time. Who can argue with that? But some of the best books that I've ever read seethed with anger and were probably written as a way to cope. And now for my own conclusions. I agree with Jash Dholani that it's possible to objectively distinguish between good art and bad art, but I disagree with his way to do it. And I'm not a communist, and I also love old books. Perhaps he should read some other old books, but at the same time, I admire him for his guts. I'm grateful to him. Thanks to his master list, I was challenged to think about what good art and bad art really are and how to distinguish them. I admire him also because he's using Twitter to become a writer, that he's willing to make mistakes in the public eye, that he's probably going to use this to get a larger audience to which he can speak ultimately with more wisdom. I bet within 5 or 10 years, he'll write another list that teaches me something. Anyway, I hope that's the case, and thanks for listening.